Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is our second in our series today. This is unemployment during COVID. And we have Anya Morgan, who's an attorney with Lavender Rights Project with us today. And most importantly, we have the Black Trans Task Force here with you. And a little bit about us. The Black Trans Task Force was formed to look at the problem of violence against the Black trans community, specifically and especially against trans femmes and women. And so, we're looking at in a sort of hierarchy of needs way of all of those aspects that contribute to violence. So that includes us doing a community survey. It includes us reaching out to community partners and also looking at the different aspects. So, houselessness and access to health care and et cetera, and down the list, and figuring out how can we get to the place where we can do have some preventative measures from some of the, for some sense of protection for our community. And I think at this time, maybe introduce the task force. My name is Jalen Scott, she, her. I'm the co-executive director of Lavender Rights Project. And also a member of the task force. It's good to meet all of you. And next in my screen is Scarlett.
Hi, I'm Scarlett, she, her pronouns. I'm an artist and witch based down in Olympia, Washington. In addition to being a member of the Black Trans Task Force, I organize here in Olympia with Heart Spark right now. We're doing like a twice a month mobile food bank benefiting trans folks around Olympia. So that's me. Renee, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Renee Giroux. Besides being on the task force, I'm a DJ and musician. I have experience working professionally with LGBTQ BIPOC communities dating back to 2013. I've been involved with some different aspects of that, ranging from youth arts to HIV research, so kind of a varied background in that regard. Besides the task force, I'm the founder of the Darkness Seattle Queer and Trans People of Color Arts Collective and the Darkness Party Series, and the creator of @PayBlackTransWomen, which is a Twitter account dedicating to boosting crowdfunding from Black trans women and Black trans femmes. Nicole, go ahead.
My name is Nicole or Nikki, either one is fine by me. She, her pronouns. I'm originally from Dallas. I am a Marine Corps veteran who served for 5 years. And what I get, besides part of being a member of the task force, I'm also one who goes out and, as for my activism, I'm going out to not only fight for, when I go to fight, it's not only for the trans folks who are local to me, it's also for those in the military. So it's one where I've had multiple assets where I go down to Olympia, I've gone down to Austin. There's many different facets that I've been involved in, but all culminating in activism. So that's part of what I do. And then, without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Randy.
Hi, my name is Randy Ford. I use she, her, goddess as pronouns. I am born in Seattle, so Seattle's my home sometimes, unfortunately. But I am an artist and educator. Primarily my work for the last 7 years has been a teaching artist, working with youth K through high school, in college actually. I'm also a member of AU Collective, a dance organization, 501c3, that focuses on centering women, queer people, and people of color at the forefront of everything that we do. I'm also a member of the House of Noir, the Seattle Kiki ballroom scene, and yeah, activism is my life right now. And so definitely being part of the task force is a honor, just so I can get my community resourced and, you know, trying to be sustained. Ganesha.
Hi everyone, I'm Ganesha Gold Buffalo. My pronouns are it, it's, itself.
Now we're gonna hand it off to Anya.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Anya. We're going to be talking about unemployment. There we go. So thank you so much to the task force for having me. I'm a staff attorney at Lavender Rights Project. I focus mainly on employment discrimination, Medicaid coverage for transition-related procedures, as well as representing youth in the foster care system. And it sounds like if you have questions, if you would type them in the chat, and then a moderator can either ask them or you can jump in with a question. I'm open to either. Okay, so why is this important? If you're here, you probably already know this, but just to underline it, unemployment in the US has surged due to COVID-19. What was already a confusing system now has new rules to learn and understand. And importantly, you may be eligible for benefits and not know it. So hopefully after this presentation, you will be able to look into that. And so also, while it's great that eligibility has expanded, the system still leaves many people out. So that's important to know. This is not a perfect solution, but if it's to your advantage, that is great. So like any good lawyer would do, I have a disclaimer. So nothing in this presentation constitutes legal advice. It's a compilation of legal information that you can find online through Washington Law Help, the Unemployment Law Project, and the Economic Security Department website. It's always a good idea to consult a lawyer one-on-one about your particular legal issue. And I'll be talking about the Unemployment Law Project a lot through this. They are really the experts. They provide free legal advice on their telephone hotline, and then they also provide direct representation for a small fee. So before we go into the COVID rules, I'm going to go over sort of Unemployment 101. What is unemployment? How do you generally qualify outside of COVID times, as those things still apply but are expanded? So what are unemployment benefits? The Economic Security Department, ESD, pays benefits to applicants who lost work through no fault of their own, and that's important. That's something we'll be coming back to. And you also have to have worked 680 hours in the base year, and I'll explain what the base year is, I believe, in the next slide. This money comes from taxes paid by employers, and each claim assessed to an employer's account can result in a tax rate increase in future years. So that's why employers can get really testy about your unemployment claims and will often dispute them because it does cost them something. The amount that you're awarded depends on your earnings in the base year, and each state has different laws about the maximum unemployment payment per week. Washington's limit is one of the highest. So what is the base year? This can get a little bit confusing, but there's a good example here on this slide that should help you figure it out if you have just filed. So the base year is the first 4 of the last 5 completed calendar quarters before the week in which you file your claim. So here's an example that probably applies to most people watching this webinar. If you file your claim in April, May, or June of 2020, your base year is January 1st, 2019 through December 31st, 2019. All right, and how do you apply? So you can apply online or over the phone. Right now, ESD is recommending that you apply online as their phone lines are really backed up. Before you apply, you should have this information with you to make sure you can fill out the whole application. So first, your legal name, and that's whichever name is on file with Social Security. Your Social Security number, birth date, contact information, your work history for the past 18 months, including employer names, addresses, phone numbers, start and end dates for each job, and then your bank account and routing number if you'd like to sign up for direct deposit. Okay, so not yet talking about COVID-19, what are the basic eligibility criteria? Oh, sorry, I was looking at the chat. So outside of COVID-19, you have to have worked 680 hours in the base year. You have to have worked in Washington sometime in the last 18 months. You must be able and available for work, which we'll go into further. And you have to have been laid off or fired through no fault of your own, or have done a good cause quit, which we'll go through the list of what constitutes a good cause quit. But the clearest case is always to be laid off. So a common question that comes up is, what is the difference between being laid off and being fired? Generally, ESD treats your job as a layoff if your employer is not replacing you. If your employer is replacing you, they generally treat you as being fired. If you were fired, that doesn't mean you automatically don't get benefits. You may still be eligible so long as you were not fired for misconduct. You can always appeal a denial if you believe you did not commit misconduct. So outside of COVID times, this is a lot of what the appeals process deals with, is proving that you did not commit misconduct and you were fired for another reason. So that could be discrimination, really anything that's not violating the rules of the workplace. Okay, so what if you quit? So there are certain scenarios where it is okay to quit and you may still be eligible for benefits. And again, this is still talking about not during COVID times. We'll get to those expanded criteria later on. So you may be eligible for benefits under a narrow set of circumstances called good cause quits. And here's the list. So if you quit to take another job, so for example, you quit because you have a job offer, but then that job falls through, you may be eligible. You became sick or disabled, or a family member did. You moved to be with a partner and are now outside of your labor market area. You needed to protect yourself or your family from DV. Your hours or pay were reduced by 25% or more. Your employer changed the location of your job. You alerted your employer to a safety problem or illegal activity and it was not fixed. Your work was changed and now goes against your religious or moral beliefs. You entered approved apprenticeship training or training under the Trade Act, or you worked full-time and part-time jobs at the same time. You quit the part-time job and then were laid off from the full-time job. So these are the main scenarios under which you can quit and potentially still be eligible for benefits. And these have been expanded due to COVID, which we will get to in a second. Okay, so special rules for COVID-19. So the CARES Act was passed, which did four main things. Expanded eligibility, and that was under the program called Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. So this means that there are now expanded criteria under which you'd be eligible for benefits, whereas you might not have qualified in the past. Secondly, job search requirements and the waiting week have been suspended, which means you do not have to show that you are actively applying for jobs. In the past, you used to have to submit a log that showed you were applying for a certain number of jobs per week. You no longer have to do that, although you do have to be available for work, which we will get to. And the waiting week was suspended, which means you no longer have to wait a week between applying for benefits and receiving your benefits, although many people have experienced delays in receiving their benefits. Third, there's an extra $600 a week from March 29th to July 31st, and that program is called Pandemic Unemployment Compensation. And then claims have been extended 13 weeks for a total of 39 weeks, and that's called Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation. Okay, now the majority of my presentation is going through frequently asked questions, and these have been pulled from the Unemployment Law Project's frequently asked questions, as they get the majority of these cases and are the experts. So we'll go through these, and then if you have questions, there's also going to be time for your questions at the end. Okay, so first, what if you have COVID? If you have COVID, you should qualify. That's one of the main things that these expanded benefits were created for. If you're severely ill with COVID and will be ill for a long time, you should apply for paid family and medical leave. And you can't have both at the same time. What if you were exposed to COVID and you are quarantined? You should be covered under the emergency rule if this is the case. Again, always collect documentation if this applies to you.
There's a question from the chat.
Sure. Let's see.
How does this apply if you aren't immediately replaced? For example, your contract ends, or if you left the company on good terms because you were offered another job?
Okay, so I can speak to the latter. If you left the company on good terms, you were offered another job, and then COVID hit, and now you're unemployed. That's one of the scenarios under which you should qualify. So you should apply for benefits. Yeah, if your contract ended and now you can't find work because of COVID, that would also count, if I'm understanding the question correctly. Feel free to follow up. All right, I'll move on. So what if you're staying home because you're immunocompromised? That is, again, one of the scenarios in which, oops, how do I go back? You should be covered. But again, make sure you have documentation from your doctor in case you need to appeal a denial. What if my employer shuts down either because of the stay-home order or because of slow business? Again, you should be covered. These are sort of the more slam dunk ones that we're doing first, and then we'll get into the gray area ones. Okay, what if my hours are reduced by 25% or more because of COVID? Oh, great. Sounds like the question was answered. So yes, you should be covered under the emergency rule. So in this case, you're sort of in, you have a choice to make, because you would qualify for potentially partial unemployment if you apply while you're still working, and you potentially have a good cause quit, because this is one of the reasons for which you can quit and potentially get unemployment. Although it is always harder to get unemployment if you quit, because then the burden shifts to you to show that you had good cause. But that is a choice that you have here. Looks like we got a question. Oh, survey link. Okay. I'm a full-time student with a part-time job. Can I receive benefits? So the answer is yes, provided you're unemployed or partially unemployed, available to work, and unable to work because of COVID. You should be eligible under the PUA program. So there, under non-COVID rules, there's usually a requirement that your employment has to be the principal source of your income, and that doesn't apply under the COVID rule. Okay, I think Megan might have touched on this in the last presentation, but Social Security payments do not interfere with unemployment benefits, as they're not considered income for unemployment purposes. There are some things that are considered income, such as a retirement payment, which we will cover in another question, but Social Security is not one of those things. Okay, we've got another question. Let's see. Could a person who takes a job at home and contracts COVID use FMLA if they anticipate quarantine carrying out, making them unable to work? I presume that FMLA would not apply if you are on unemployment. Unemployment is exhausted, and then you apply for leave if you become exposed. Okay, let's see. So, yes, I think, let's see if Kalisa, let me know if this answers your question, but you can, if you prefer to use FMLA, you can use your FMLA up first and then apply for unemployment. You can't have both at the same time. But either should apply in this situation. Let me know if that makes sense.
Yeah, so so I'm currently on unemployment, and if I were to become exposed and my unemployment had been exhausted, then I could apply for FMLA, provided that, say, I were to take a job where I was working from home and become exposed and no longer be unemployed.
That's my understanding. So for FMLA, I believe you have to sort of be attached to an employer. So yes, if you were to take another job, then you could take FMLA.
Even if you haven't worked at the job for 12 months for 2,560 hours?
Yes, so I believe they're being flexible on the hours requirement, both for the base year and how long you've worked at your current job. That's my understanding.
And if somebody, like with so many people unemployed right now, if somebody were to take a job prior to like COVID, anything changing from COVID, and they needed to take FMLA, you anticipate it to change, where they would go back to, hey, you have to have worked here for a year at this many hours, or there'd be some flexibility around that?
You know, I'm not sure on that one. I'm not 100% sure. I know that the hours requirements are flexible with the unemployment benefits. I'm not sure exactly how it works with FMLA. So that would be a question to follow up with an attorney or someone else who does FMLA work.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Okay, so what if you're caring for a sick family member? This is a case-by-case basis, but it's a good argument for staying home. So yes, you should apply for benefits, and you can always argue that on appeal. Sort of same answer to this one. So what if I'm not sick, but I have to care for my children who are home from school? Case-by-case basis, but again, that the Unemployment Law Project has indicated that that has been a strong argument for them in fighting appeals for folks who need to stay home. And when I say fighting appeals, that refers to what if your claim is denied by your employer, you can appeal that decision and argue, no, I actually should be receiving benefits and here's why. And so there are some issues that are stronger than others on appeal. Okay, what if I want to take sick time until I can return to work? So yes, you can take your sick time. If you prefer to take your sick time rather than receive unemployment or take your sick time until you exhaust it, you can do that. You can't have both at the same time. So sick pay counts as income for unemployment purposes and would count against your claim. And then sort of on the flip side of that, your employer is not allowed to make you exhaust your sick pay before filing for unemployment. We have another question. Have you encountered anyone trying to fight appeals being denied childcare provisions because job isn't listed as essential? So I don't actually represent folks on the appeals, so that would be a great question for the Unemployment Law Project. I'll plug this again at the end, but they have a webinar every Monday at noon. So that's tomorrow, and they do like FAQ, and then they take audience questions as well. So that would be a great question. I'm not sure how much that is coming up. Okay, so what if your hours are reduced but not quite by 25%? So I'll repeat this a couple times because it comes up in different situations, but a person who's working can apply for unemployment. You don't have to be totally unemployed to apply for unemployment, just partially. So as long as you report your income and your hours, you can apply. You may or may not qualify based on how much you're making and how much you're working. Another option is you could be eligible for partial unemployment through the work share program while still working part-time. And I wrote ask your employer about this because I believe they have to be signed up for the work share program. Okay, what if I'm still working full-time, but my employer has cut incentive pay? So again, a person who's working can apply. Just report your income and your hours, and you can see if you'll qualify. The Unemployment Law Project has said that they would not recommend quitting based on a cut of commissions. That's come up a few times apparently, and that claim is frequently denied if there was no cut to your base pay. So that hasn't been sort of a strong reason to quit. Okay. What if my employer closes but only temporarily? So you may be able to obtain standby status and claim benefits for up to 8 weeks, possibly longer. Standby status is now available for part-time workers as well. And this is another one where you need to ask your employer if this applies to you, as I believe it's something that they have to register for. And I'm flying through these, so if you guys have questions, please put them in the chat.
We've got a question actually in the chat that I
great.
got missed is, have you encountered anyone trying to fight appeals being denied childcare provisions because job isn't listed as essential? I know Washington has far more listed under essential than some other states.
So yeah, so I don't have, I'm not actually doing these appeals, so I don't have a great idea of what issues are coming up. That would be a great question for the Unemployment Law Project. I do imagine if your job is essential, that would be something that would be taken into account in the hearing. So that's a good question. But
I'm so sorry about that.
Oh no, you're fine.
That question started being answered.
No problem. No, it's good, because if you missed it, somebody else probably did too. So yeah, feel free to ask whatever. Okay, so as some of you may know, there's a penalty-free 401k withdrawal rule happening right now, meaning you can withdraw from your 401k without the regular penalties. So how does that affect unemployment? If you get a pension paid for by the employer, that gets deducted from your unemployment benefits on a weekly basis. So 401k withdrawals have been problematic in this sense because there's a question on the claim that says, did you receive funds from pension or retirement? And if you mark yes, that could count against your claim. It should only count against it in the week that you withdraw the funds because it's on a weekly basis. But that is something to keep in mind. Okay, we sort of covered this, but what if I was about to start a job when COVID hit? So if you were working at one job and then quit to take a second job, and then COVID hit and you are no longer able to work that second job, you should be eligible for regular benefits. If you remember, that's one of the regular eligibility criteria, is quitting one job to take another. If you hadn't worked at all in the last year and you just got a new job before COVID hit, you're less likely to qualify for regular benefits, but you may qualify for PUA, the emergency COVID benefits, as long as you continue to certify that you're unemployed due to COVID. So what if I didn't have a job in the last year and now I can't get one because of COVID? So this is similar to the last question, except you didn't get a job just before COVID hit, but you're ostensibly looking for a job but can't find one. So you wouldn't qualify for regular benefits, but you may qualify for PUA, again, as long as you continue to certify that you're unemployed due to COVID, that you're available but unable to work. Let's see. Are there any protections or tips around work access training tests that can't be administered because, for instance, fingerprint facilities, driver's licensing facilities, drug testing facilities are closed? Callisto, can you elaborate on what you're asking there?
Yeah, so and it also ties into another question that I had,
Sure.
where they ask, so this is the work that you've done in the past. So I worked in nonprofit community engagement for the past 10 years. And right before COVID hit, I was like, oh, one door closes, another opens. I'm going to start looking for jobs in another industry. And then within the first week when they started doing shelter in place and shuttering down of businesses, you couldn't get fingerprinted unless you were a law enforcement officer. So that mitigated any new hospice workers And then for people trying to get driver's licensing at this time, I understand that teens can take the test online, but if an adult were to need to take the driver's test, certain facilities are saying, okay, if you have a mask on, we'll administer the test. But if somebody were to have signed up with a school and the school doesn't have clear communication, how would somebody do that? And just the rules around essential workers versus just sitting on it, waiting for your unemployment to run out and working whatever job you can get on the computer in the meantime. Since I don't anticipate a new normal anytime soon. But another part of my question was where you list why you're not looking for a job, why I'm not looking for a job in the nonprofit industry. And here's why I'm in training to, I'm in trade school to become a particular job worker, but I can't get the work I need without being able to just go in and get my driver's license, go in and get my drug test, etc.
Yeah, those are great questions. So under regular unemployment rules, you're right that you would need to show why you're not looking for work in your area of knowledge. And so the training that you're doing, all that would be really great evidence to have. Under the PUA, under the emergency COVID rule, you don't need to show that you're looking for work. They are going to ask you, did you turn down work? And if you have to say yes to that, you have to have a good explanation for that. But if you're simply not looking for work at this time, that's not something that you have to show under this emergency rule. And that would include if you're unable to look for work because of, fingerprinting and all that jazz. It's not something you have to prove at this time, but it is a good idea to get in the habit of, collecting those reasons for whenever the emergency rule expires.
Yeah, I've still been doing the submit 3 jobs you've applied for a week, even if it's something like gig work, or even if it's something as simple as I'm going to offer tutoring from home for such and such company. It's not ideal, but it at least meets the requirements for me to still receive unemployment and meet them in the middle. And I think my other question was around so we've got basically 3 months of unemployment. So if I filed in March and we've been on lockdown, that extends at least till May or June, or at least the end of this month or the beginning of next month. And then I'd applied for workforce development, and that requires a substantial amount of paperwork that is a little overwhelming, to say the least, that submits that I'm doing this type of training, and it can be or cannot be denied because I have to say, hey, I used to work for 10 years in the nonprofit community around this, and now I'm trying to become a funeral director. So both of those areas about the correct language so that I don't get denied. Right. I think the worst thing that any of us could think now is oh, great, I got denied that scholarship. I got denied that grant, or I got denied the workforce development that would extend my unemployment until I'm able to successfully go outside without worrying about my health.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think so for your specific case, I would definitely ask the question during the ULP webinar or call them, their free hotline, just to make sure you get the most expert advice. But from what I can tell, it seems like you may not have to apply for that extra program that's based on your training right now, because you should be able to qualify for the PUA assistance without certifying that you're looking for jobs. Some people are still getting the question asking them to submit their list of jobs that they're looking for, but it is considered optional under the COVID rules. So you don't have to do that. But before you stop, just because your situation sounds a little bit more complicated, I would check in with ULP and just make sure that that is what you should do.
Jalen here. Just a quick note. I think we'll, in the interest of time, what we'll do now is if you have a question, type it in like usual. And we will take little breaks where Anya thinks it makes sense to pause and take questions. These questions are really good, and they contextualize this information in a way that makes it a little easier to understand. So thank you for them. But also let's see if we can, is that okay, Anya?
Yeah, that sounds great. We're actually, I kind of sped through the first slide, so we're doing good on time, but that works for me.
Perfect. Please keep questions. Thank you.
Great. All right. Okay, I can't remember if we already discussed this slide, but basically if you didn't have a job and now you can't get a job, you might still be eligible as long as you certify that COVID is the reason why you are available for work but not able to work. Okay. So does the job search suspension mean I don't have to be available to work? No, you still have to be able and available for work. If you decline a job, you have to explain why. And I talked about this a little bit, but if it's because of COVID, you might have a good shot in still being eligible for benefits. We'll go into this a little bit deeper in the next one. Okay, so this is a question I've had come up quite a bit professionally and personally with people in my life. So stuff is starting to reopen, right? Restaurants, you know, other businesses are starting to reopen, retail. So if your employer reopens in phase 2 of Inslee's plan, can you stay on unemployment? So there are a few answers to this. So if you do go back to work, potentially for reduced hours, continue to file for unemployment and report your hours and income. And your benefit amount will likely be reduced, but you can still apply for unemployment. If you refuse a job, you're going to have a good reason. So some of those good reasons are if there's a health and safety issue. So if you are sick, if you're immunocompromised, anything else along those lines, you don't have to go back to work. Those are good reasons to not go back to work. If your employer asks you to come back but do a different job, that could be an unsuitable job, and you may be able to refuse that work. So for example, if you're a chef and you're asked to come back to do cleaning work, that could be unsuitable, and you could say no. But in any of these scenarios, rather than quit outright, it's a better idea to say, you know, I have serious health concerns, or whatever your reason is, I can't come back until things improve, but I'm not quitting. Because as soon as you quit, the burden is on you, if there's a denial, to show that there was good cause to quit. If they fire you, I can't remember if I have a slide on this, but if they fire you, you're in a better position. So if you can wait it out until you can return or until they fire you, you're in a better position for maintaining your unemployment benefits than if you outright quit. Okay, so how do you show, so I said one of the situations in which you don't have to return to work is if your workplace is unsafe. So how do you show that your workplace is unsafe? Refer to safety standards for your kind of workplace. And so that could be like any reputable source like CDC guidance, the governor's guidance for reopening. There are detailed lists on the governor's website of the requirements for different types of businesses reopening. So for example, if you're working at a restaurant, your employer is not doing enough cleaning of the facilities, not allowing for social distancing, etc. All those things could help your claim in showing that your workplace was unsafe and that's why you did not return. Okay, and so how do I extend my benefits? So you may be able to extend your benefits under the PEUC, which, if you remember, that's one of the emergency COVID unemployment programs. So if you've exhausted your regular unemployment claim with a benefit year that ended on or after the week ending July 6, 2019, if you're not eligible for a new unemployment claim in Washington, any other state, or Canada, if you're able to work, available for work, and actively seeking work as directed, if you've left work through no fault of your own, and then just to note that these benefits are payable for 13 weeks through December 26, 2020, and you can start the process of accessing these additional benefits by using your eServices account to file a PEUC claim. So it's just filing a separate claim to extend your benefits if you're regular benefits have expired. Okay, so what if I have other questions that aren't answered here, or if my claim was denied? So this is where the Unemployment Law Project comes in. This is their, that number is their free advice hotline. They provide free information, advice, and referrals on a number of unemployment topics, which you can find listed on their website. And they also do direct representation, and it costs $200, but only if they win. So you can take it out of the benefit amount that you get. Okay. Should I read the questions in the chat, or does a moderator want to do that? I can read them. Let's see. Okay. When unemployment goes to review paperwork, and if one said, began school past date of initially beginning school, and they notice claim each week, would that pose an issue? For example, started school April 6th, shouldn't have to list every week, starting program, and answer no, but I think I clicked yes twice. So this may be a question you want to check in about your individual case with ULP. But again, I don't think you should have to be showing that you're in school or in training in order to receive the emergency COVID benefits. So hopefully that sort of answers your question, but you should talk one-on-one with an unemployment attorney. Next question, does having a criminal record affect eligibility for unemployment? That's a good question. I don't believe so, but again, that's a great question for ULP. And again, their webinar is tomorrow at noon, and their hotline is open anytime during the week. And then our last question is, could folks suggest an adaptable measure to employer? I'm not sure what that means. If you want to clarify, feel free.
I don't want to assume what they meant. Maybe they're typing that out. But what I was understanding, just because you were talking about situations in which you could still get unemployment if it was unsafe to return back to work. I think that means like trying to work out a safer work environment upon returning. That was my assumption.
Yeah, you definitely can. And that, you know, if there's documented conversations between you and your employer where you're saying, hey, like, I want to come back, here are some things you could do to make it safe for me to come back. Otherwise, you know, I'm not quitting, but I can't come back until it's safe. I think that's not only a great idea to actually work out a way to come back, but also if they say no, or if they end up firing you, that's a great record to have, that you were attempting to come back but couldn't. That shows that you're available for work. Hopefully that answered the question. All right. Well, if there aren't any more questions, here's the contact info for the Washington Black Trans Task Force. Follow them on Facebook, Instagram. Their email is there, and then a link to donate. Make sure to choose BTTF in the donate to. All right, if there are no other questions, thank you so much for having me.
Time, weren't we, Anya?
Yeah, I really went too fast, but glad we have some extra time.
We have some time. Sorry, the person who, I'm not supposed to be saying names, I can edit that out, but the person who asked the question earlier, if you want to expound on that, or I know Randy asked a question and some other folk. Feel free to say something now.
Yeah, I was thinking for my question about the criminal record, I was thinking in terms of, say you've been looking for work and you've been denied because of criminal record. Yeah, like would that also, I guess, be a good reason to apply for unemployment, or does that not get recognized as a valid reason for being unemployed?
That's a great question. I would guess that they do not recognize that, but if during this time, if you could say, you know, I've been denied because of my criminal record, but also because of COVID, if you can sort of slip it in that way, that could be one way to get around that. If there's another reason why you're being denied, and I would double check that with ULP, but that's my educated guess about whether that would count.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I'll definitely check out the ULP tomorrow for sure and ask.
Great.
Thank you for that.
Good question. Yeah, no problem.
I may have missed this. So if you're fired and you want to do unemployment now, like what are some of the, you'll be denied for part of it and get the emergency unemployment? How does that work?
So it depends why you were fired. If you were fired because you said you wouldn't come back in because, you know, you're concerned about your health or you're trying to flatten the curve, that's not misconduct. So you could qualify under regular unemployment benefits. If you were fired for misconduct and they can show that at a hearing, that's a little bit more of a gray area. You may be able to qualify still under the emergency COVID benefits if you can show that you can't find work after that job because of COVID. Does that answer your question?
It does.
And again, you're always in a better position if you are fired or let go than if you have to quit. If you have to quit, you have to quit, you know, do what's safe for you. But if you can hang in there and say, I'm not quitting, but I can't come back, that puts you in a stronger position.
I'm realizing go ahead. Was somebody talking?
I think that was just an echo or something.
Great. I'm realizing for Black Indigenous folks who are trans, especially, thinking again about sex work, and you know, they don't qualify for the most part unless you're able to figure out how. I know there is a person in Seattle who helps people file taxes so that they can have some documented work, but that's even tricky with figuring out how to document your quarterly, how much you've made in each quarter. But thinking about areas of activism and figuring out, you know, what needs to happen so that all people and all work is validated, and there can be other ways to do some qualification for unemployment seems pretty critical, because I believe that industry in particular has been really hit hard right now too.
Definitely, yeah, and that's a really important point for when we get back to regular unemployment rules. They would definitely not be able to access benefits because of some work being valued higher than other work and considered real work. Under COVID, though, even if you can't document work in the base year, you should still apply because it's more of a gray area now under COVID, as long as you continue to certify that you can't find future work because of COVID.